Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your testimony, and again, thank you for your extraordinary leadership. Let me just begin with a couple of questions. Nigeria was a Tier 1 country in 2010 and 2011. I actually visited Nigeria and met with their JTIP, their equivalent of our efforts to combat trafficking. They seem to be very, very focused. I visited 2 shelters. They were inadequately housed, but it was a resourcing problem. And I'm wondering if you might speak to why they're Tier 2. Of course, they're not Tier 3, and they're not a watch list country. But when Nigeria was put on Tier 1, it was cause for celebration that one of the, the most populous of the African countries had made such progress. What has happened?
Mr. Smith, I'm glad you asked about Nigeria, because to us there is so much promise in NAPTIP, the Nigerian anti-trafficking structure. The very structure of NAPTIP and the way that they're staffing their offices, to us, is an innovation that all countries in the world should look to. This notion of bringing together police officers, prosecutors, and social workers assigned to the same case on the same day. It's not police officers work a case for a year and then they maybe take it to a prosecutor who turns it down because they never met the victim. It's not social workers as an afterthought. It's actually integrating those 3 things. And that was, I think, one of the things that drove us in 2009 as far as the upgrade was concerned. There's been some leadership changes in NAPTIP over the last year or so, and I think that those are also things that we're looking at that will have a very positive effect. The new head of NAPTIP is energetic, she's innovative, and she's serious. And we think that that's putting them on an upward trajectory. I can't say what the tier rankings would be for Nigeria in any given year. We have to look at the evidence for those 12-month periods. But we do think that there's, I think, positive movement in Nigeria. Nigeria as a model. I think one of the things that we've seen is whether a country is a Tier 1 country or a Tier 2 country, if there's an innovation, we need to call people's effect to that. And I, on the Senate side, was in front of an Asia subcommittee that was perhaps a little more skeptical about Nigeria and skeptical about the fact that we would think that much wealthier or other high-status countries in the Asia region could learn from a Nigeria on a law enforcement issue. And frankly, that was something that we took back, and we went straight to those governments and said, Nigeria is doing this right, and we all need to look at them as a model. Again, each year we look at the rankings and we'll see where we go, but we are heartened by some of the innovations that we see out of NAPTIP.
A few weeks ago, Mr. Ambassador, the chairwoman of the Foreign Affairs Committee for China, Madam Fu, sat right where you're sitting, but facing the other way, and we had a dialogue, members of our committee. I brought up the trafficking issue and the nexus with the one-child per couple policy and the gendercide that has occurred systematically over the last 30 years through sex selection abortion, and the fact that tens of millions of girls and now young women are missing simply because of sex selection abortion. And as I pointed out in my opening, drawing from the TIP report, you point out that the skewed sex ratio of 118 boys to 100 girls in China has served as a key source of demand for the trafficking of foreign women, and I would also add for domestic women moving in-country around in China. Madam Fu was indignant that I even brought it up when I mentioned to her that 600 women, just under 600 women per day commit suicide in China. It's the only place in the world where the relationship or the numbers far exceed male suicides, directly attributable to the one-child per couple policy and now this horrible consequence of trafficking. She said I was making it up, and I pointed out that our State Department's Country Reports on Human Rights Practices makes very clear that number came from their Chinese government Centers for Disease Control. And she looked at it and walked away in a huff. My question is, what was the Chinese reaction to being placed on Tier 3? If you could maybe elaborate on how this demand is only getting worse, especially for the ASEAN countries where women are being trafficked into into, and that goes for North Korea as well, into China because of the scarcity of women. They don't exist relative to the number of males in that country. So demand has been skyrocketing, if you could speak to that as well. And thirdly, where do you think the administration may go on enforcing or implementing a sanctions regime on the PRC?
Perhaps I'll take those backwards.
Oh, sure.
Once the Trafficking in Persons report comes out, there's then a 90-day period in which we look at the possibility of sanctions for the Tier 3 countries. And we work with our colleagues in the regional bureaus, we work with the White House and others in looking to see to what extent there is aid to those countries that we would then be having impact on, to what extent there are things that we would want to preserve the working relationship around, especially things like law enforcement training and other things that go directly to the human trafficking issue, because of course you don't want to cut off the way that you can make change with a particular country. And so trying to figure out what the universe actually is as far as U.S. foreign assistance that would be subject to sanctions. And that's the process that's going on right now. I can't speak as to where that's going to end up. I can certainly tell you, though, that we're taking it with all seriousness, not just in China's situation, but in all of the Tier 3 countries. And there's some new Tier 3 countries. There are also countries that have been in Tier 3 in the past, and each year we want to look at those with a fresh slate, because we want to make sure that the sanctions regime is tied to the rankings, but also tied to the situation on the ground. And that typically, I think we're usually talking about a mid-September date as far as the sanctions decision by the President. As you point out, Mr. Smith, the Trafficking in Persons report does not shy away from recognizing the interrelationship between the one-child policy, the sex ratios, and the demand, especially for women, not just for bride trafficking, but for sex trafficking as a whole. That notion of the disposability of women that we see, as Kevin Bales calls the situation of trafficking, the problem of disposable people. And I think that that's something that we have raised with the Chinese, not simply in the context of the report, but when I'm sitting down with my counterparts talking about human trafficking, it should come as no surprise that this is one of the concerns that we have. And we certainly communicate that to them. Their response this year, and without necessarily getting into the middle of particular diplomatic conversations, I think that just as we had a fruitful visit a few months ago to China, we feel that there is some room to work with the Chinese. The ratification of the Palermo Protocol, finally, the new plan of action. These are very positive things. The new plan of action came out after the reporting period closed, and so it's not something that's necessarily reflected in this report. But the new plan of action for the first time actually says, let's look at unofficial work. It had been that trafficking could only happen officially in in China if you had abuse within a labor unit. And if you weren't an official labor unit, then you weren't employed, and so therefore you couldn't be held in forced labor. So all of the underground economy was exempted from the application of the law. So the notion of them closing that loophole, the notion of them looking with the All China Women's Federation so that you could have the screening of people who were found in prostitution as a matter of course. These are all things that we're enthusiastic about when we look at that action plan. That action plan is a future promise, and future promises under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act are Tier 2 watch list criteria. And so when we look at that action plan, when we look at what may come from it, we're going to be working with the Chinese, and I think that their response to the report and the discussions that we're going to be having with them coming out of their response shows that there's, I think, a lot of places that we can work together on this rather than being at loggerheads.
Okay. I do have many other questions, but I'll yield to my friend, Ms. Bass.